Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel. I am a senior planner focused on active transportation and SCAG. Just want to thank you all for joining today's Toolbox Tuesday session. We're focused today on how quick build projects can support roadway safety and complete streets. Our goals for you today are that everyone gains an understanding of quick build projects and to hopefully gain inspiration from several case studies and partnership opportunities in our region. Couple logistics for today. So today's Toolbox Tuesday session is scheduled for an hour and a half. As you joined the call, you saw that the meeting is being recorded. There is closed captioning that is available. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a button to click live transcript and you can toggle that on and off. As you joined, you saw that your participant line is muted. And so later when we get into our Q&A session, you can put your question to the chat box or raise your hand and we'll go through and call on folks. So as we get to the Q&A, please take care to keep your mic muted unless you are asking a question. So as we go through the presentations, we'll be logging all the questions and try to cover as many as we can given the time that we have. And finally, a recording of this webinar and the presentation slides will be available on our SCAG website and shared with everyone who has registered after the event. Before we get into our session content, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement. We're currently on occupied and unceded land of Indigenous peoples who are and have been the traditional caretakers of the land in this region. If you haven't already, I encourage you all to visit nativeland.ca to learn more about the traditional inhabitants of the land you live and work on. So here's an overview of our agenda. So we'll be starting off again with an overview of what a quick build project is and some lessons learned from quick build projects in the SCAG region. We'll hear from a few local jurisdictions, so City of Pasadena and their quick build project along Allen Avenue, and also City of Long Beach and the role of quick build projects in their approach to incorporating safety and complete streets. We'll also hear from Caltrans District 8 about the quick build guidance that they're developing and potential partnership opportunities. We'll also share about a current funding opportunity hosted by SCAG through our Sustainable Communities program, and then aiming to have plenty of time for Q&A. So we wanted to get a sense of who's here today. So we have a very brief poll. We've got two questions. One is to first understand just who's represented in the room, so what type of organization you're representing today, and then also getting understanding of just where we are at geographically, so which county or some other location that you're joining us today. So there should be two questions that pop up, and once you answer, you can scroll down to your other question. All righty, we've got pretty good participation, so go ahead and end the poll. Let's see our results. So got the majority of folks joining us from local government, but we do have quite a few folks from the regional and state government and also private companies. And then in terms of our geographic distribution, we've got majority of our 6 counties, but not quite big representation from LA County. And very exciting to also see we've got folks from other locations in California and even somewhere else in the US. All righty. Oops. Okay. So now I will turn it over to Carlos to talk us through a quick build overview and lessons learned.
Great. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I assume y'all can hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Great, wonderful. So good afternoon. My name is Carlos Velasquez. I'm a principal with KOA. I primarily focus on managing projects, including active transportation, and as of late, a lot of quick build projects. So what we're going to be talking about in the next 10 or so minutes is a little bit about what is a quick build. So a little bit of an overview on that, typical materials and how elements are manifested through these materials. We'll discuss a little bit about that. Timeline and life cycle. So what is the expected timeline for implementing a quick build, and what is the anticipated lifetime of a quick build project? And a lot of these really depend on your situation. We'll also discuss how we can integrate the SCAG kit of parts. So this is a very useful tool, and I'll have a small case study of how we've implemented that as part or on the lead up to a quick build project in LA. And then lastly, we'll touch on some lessons learned. So a little bit about us. We've been around for about 35 years. We provide a whole suite of consulting services, primarily in transportation. And the focus of today is going to be on the quick build aspect that we have provided for several of our clients. A few things, over the last 40 years, we have implemented 8 or so quick build projects throughout Southern California. 4 of those have been in the city of LA, and then 4 of those others have been in several parts of Southern California. They all have similar aspects, but they're also very different in both geography and the stakeholders that are being served. So I'll touch on some of these as I go through the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you want more information on these. So first, what is a quick build project? Some of you might already know this, others this might be a new term. But mainly a quick build project is a mechanism to implement short-term, near-term mobility projects on your streets. So these can be bicycle, pedestrian, traffic safety improvement projects, using something that's more durable than, say, something that would be like a SCAG kit of parts type of material. They're low to medium cost, so it doesn't mean they're inexpensive, but they're certainly less expensive than breaking concrete and doing that level of work. And the big part of these is that the city, agencies can easily change them, adjust them to fit the needs, and we'll touch a little bit on that when we discuss timeline, but they can also be relatively easily removed. So again, it wouldn't really involve heavy construction depending on the type of project you have, but it's something that can be ideally easily adjusted, removed if there's an issue, and the like. So that's essentially what a quick build project is, and I'll jump into a little bit more on timeline and those aspects a little later. So in terms of materials and elements, what I'm showing here are three different projects. A couple of them show similar elements, but they use different materials. So on the left, we have examples of protected bike lanes from Glendale and Long Beach. As you can see in those images, we use different types of materials. Both we use striping, but in the Glendale example, we were able to use K71 bollards. We had, if you look between where the 2 people on their bikes are, the city implemented Class 4 bicycle facilities and created that physical barrier using K-rail. In this example, the city actually had quite a bit of K-rail available, so they worked with a contractor to have that installed to provide that physical separation. In that example, it was more important because you had diagonal parking, and instead of installing a series of wheel stops between the parked area and the bicycle lane and the buffer, the city installed K-rails to provide that separation. So like that, vehicles as they parked, they didn't go all the way to the curb and intrude into the bicycle lane. So that was very important for this project. In Long Beach, there it's different because you have parallel parking. So vehicles typically wouldn't be going into the curb area and thus blocking the bicycle lane. So that physical separation was a little less critical compared to the Glendale example. But again, depending on the type of facility you're installing, that'll determine the type of elements and materials you want to install. On the example on the right, we were able to assist the city in installing a neighborhood traffic circle. This was at a 5-leg intersection. The city used this as a demonstration because their ultimate plan was to convert this intersection to a roundabout design. So the purpose here was to manifest a circular element along the intersection, and we use the traffic circle to do that. So again, here we used plastic posts, delineators, some signage to allow motorists to understand the movement that's going to be required along this intersection, as well as rubber curbs to keep vehicles from going onto the circle. And the examples here, again, we're showing a couple different elements. On the left side, is what we're calling enhanced pedestrian infrastructure. So again, in Glendale to the left, we use paint and posts to create some curb extensions. The interesting part here is that the city wanted to install a more artistic element at those curb extensions, but still be able to provide some protection for people who are crossing the street. So we use a combination of signs, plastic posts, and paint for the curb extensions. In LA, this is in Koreatown, in front of a middle school. There was an installation of speed cushions, and we also created a student drop-off and pickup area. So we were able to purchase some rubber speed cushions and use delineators and some pavement paint to create a drop-off and pickup area for students. And on the right side, this is a project in Calexico, so near the U.S.-Mexico border in Imperial County. Plaza space promenade was created by closing one block in downtown Calexico. So for this, the street was closed using K-rail. Pavement paint was used to create an artistic element to attract people to the space. String lights were also installed, as well as trees on planter boxes. So the space was filled in, a space was created for people to gather using these elements as well. So not all elements need to be used for traffic control or traffic sort of to navigate traffic, but they can also be used to create a space and a welcoming environment for people to gather. So in terms of timeline, what is a typical timeline of a quick build? There are several elements that are tied to this. One key takeaway is you got to treat a quick build in similar fashion as you would a more permanent installation of treatment. So that means that there's engagement that typically happens, but also design. For all of these examples, our team was able to prepare full construction documents, so full plans, full specs, and full estimates for agencies to then go ahead and put out the bid to procure a contractor. Some cities did some of the work themselves, others went ahead and procured a contractor. So the big thing on the left side here on the first box is that you got to allow enough time to not only do a lot of, if you need to go back and do outreach, but also to actually do the design, get it approved, and then procure your contractor. A lot of the times that requires council approval, that requires negotiating with the contractor. So that timeline can be pretty short or can actually extend a full year and beyond. So you need to account for that as you plan out your quick build. Implementation, the actual construction can take several days to maybe a month, depending on the complexity of the project. In Glendale, for example, that project took about 2 to 3 weeks to install, and it was pretty invasive to the street. So there was street closures and traffic control that was associated with it. Whereas with other examples, the installation took about a week. So it just depends on your project, and that typically goes much faster than the first part of the project. Evaluation can, depending on the timeline of the project, can be 1 month to 3 years. 1 month is relatively short, but you want to, once you install and vehicles are using the street and the facilities, you want to start observing and listening to your residents and how they're interacting with the elements. So if you need to go ahead and do some tweaks, that's what we have. You want to go ahead and modify the design if you can pretty quickly. So for example, if there's gridlock that's being created, if vehicles are having trouble going through a certain bollard and they keep hitting them, maybe you want to go ahead and adjust that. So you start evaluation from day one, and you continue it through the rest of the project to assess the effectiveness of some metrics that you developed to assess its effectiveness. Depending on that, you can then go ahead and procure funding to make it permanent or remove the project. Just depends on what you hear from your stakeholders and how your government feels about the project itself. A couple things on kit of parts. So this is an example in LA in the Koreatown neighborhood. This is in front of an 800 to 900 student middle school. So the city was able to acquire funding through ATP Cycle 5 to do a quick build as part of this on this block of the street. Tied to this was using the SCAG kit of parts to do a temporary pop-up to pop up the elements that were going to eventually become the quick build. Now, I can't stress enough how important this was, because not only were students and stakeholders in the area able to understand what's coming. So once the quick build was installed, it was not a surprise, but they were already familiar with it. But the other thing is that it allowed us to assess some of the design itself. We had drawn it on a plan, submitted to the city, they reviewed it, but it wasn't until we were out there that we popped up some of the potential quick build elements that we were able to understand, hey, maybe we shortened this lane, maybe we narrow things here. We were able to do different things that eventually informed the final design. So it was very important from not just engagement perspective, but also from a design perspective to do this engagement through the kit of parts. The next slide shows the installation of the quick build elements. So on the left, you see this drop off and pickup area that was created, which was manifested as part of the pop-up using the parklet, which is part of the kit of parts. And we used several cones to do that as well. And on the right, we use the SCAG kit of parts to do the high visibility crosswalks, which were eventually installed in the same location. So again, very important to, again, notify your stakeholders, but also to test out the elements before you go in and do the actual full quick build implementation. So to wrap up, some lessons learned. Ideally, your quick build project is going to be part of a plan or an ongoing program. A lot of these projects already had engagement tied to them. They're part of a formal plan or program with each agency. So it was very easy to then go ahead and speak with folks and tell them, hey, look, this is part of your bicycle plan. This is part of your pedestrian plan, or whatever else has been passed. It was very helpful to have that background as we went in to talk to folks. Re-engage, engage again and again. This is a critical part of the evaluation process. You want to hear from stakeholders what's working, what isn't. Maybe you got to go ahead and make some tweaks, but ultimately you need to stay in touch with stakeholders to make sure that the quick build is being effective. Design approval and contractor procurement, keep an eye on that timeline. Be conservative, maybe double that timeline, because you never know what might happen with the design, with some of the engagement that's happening, that's informing some of that. And then your procurement process might take a little longer. You might need to get into council. That might take time. So there's certain aspects here that might affect that timeline. Identify additional internal support. What I mean by this is, depending on how big your agency is or your jurisdiction, once you procure your contractor, what we found out, especially in the city of Almani, they had to go ahead and hire a construction manager and inspector, which they didn't have the resources for to do in-house. So then they had to find someone, or they had to send a procurement to do that as well. So again, identify those resources that you're going to need to implement your project if you don't have those resources in-house. Allow for contingencies due to cost overruns. So even though it is a quick build, even though you're using low-cost materials, you might still have cost overruns, and that might be associated with as you implement, you ran into an issue, or you have to go back and adjust things. Allow for some of that. So when you apply for funding for quick builds, allow for that contingency, and you should be able to justify it as part of your application or your narrative. Very important. So you're not then having to go to council and dig through the general fund to identify more funding to fund the quick build project. Allow for ongoing redesign and adjustments. So kind of goes without saying, you might have to, reach out to your designer to go ahead and adjust the CAD drawing to then send out to your contractor to adjust the design. So allow for that as well as you budget your quick build. And lastly, order extra materials to ease replacement. When we did some of these quick build projects, we did order some extra supplies just because it's easier to order when you're doing the quick build procurement versus having to go back. Oh, a bollard broke. Now you got to replace it. You don't have the same type. Now you put something different. It doesn't look as good. So allow for a little bit of contingency and order extra materials to ease replacement and shorten that timeline. So a few lessons learned, and I'm happy to answer any other questions, but that concludes a little bit of what we had on the overview. So happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Carlos. So far, no questions yet in the chat. And again, we'll have time for Q&A after our presentations. But if anyone has a question now, please feel free to raise your hand or put that in the chat. So I'll give folks about a minute or so to see if we have any questions. All right. If not, we'll move ahead to our next presentation from the City of Pasadena.
Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Johnson, representing the City of Pasadena. We have some other staff on this as well. And not just me, this was kind of a really whole city effort to bring this project together along with SCAG staff. The three things I'm going to touch on, first kind of talk about the Activate Allen Avenue project, some of the project feedback we received, the lessons learned we gained from doing a quick build project, and then how finally we're going to incorporate quick build into future projects. To kind of orient people to the project area, the main focus was improving access to the Allen LA Metro A-Line station, shown on the map on the right in blue. And the focus area was along Allen Avenue and access to that station. And some of the goals were to improve first and last mile access for people biking and walking to the station. We also wanted to add safety enhancements. There was a history of crashes along Allen Avenue. And additionally, just improve overall active transportation access. There's lots of other important destinations in the area, like Pasadena City College, along with local businesses. There's a really popular coffee shop at Allen and Locust in this project area as well. And to give you kind of timeline on the project, Carlos talked about how quick build can be part of kind of the overall process, and this kind of puts that into context in this example. So Allen Avenue, the project was first started developed in 2018, where the city worked with the community to identify Allen Avenue as a priority for safety and walking improvements. There's a series of community meetings, and so really kind of a vision plan came together. And then the SCAG Sustainable Communities Program presented the opportunity to test out quick build, and the idea was really to take that plan and vision and try it out with quick build. And now we're in the stages of taking the lessons learned from that quick build project and implementing more permanent improvements along Allen. And specifically diving into the quick build project, Activate Allen Avenue, as I mentioned, it was part of the SCAG grant program Sustainable Communities. I know currently there's actually a new call for quick build projects that SCAG is offering, and that's very similar to this project. And we saw it really as an opportunity to test out kind of improvements that were envisioned in that initial planning document I talked about that was first put together in 2018, and also a great opportunity to gather community feedback. You can see on the picture on the right, along the corridor, we had posters of QR codes. So if you're just walking to the station, for example, you can respond to a survey, tell how you like that project. And kind of a secondary goal was simply to try out quick build in the city. We wanted to see, does it make sense for the city crews to install this type of material? What's the best way to kind of incorporate this process and how the city does projects? And to give you a sense of some of the improvements that we installed, first was kind of enhanced crosswalks. You can see here kind of that continental style, higher visibility crosswalk was put at the major intersections. We also did curb extensions with some kind of artistic paint elements along with kind of rubber curb and also bollards. and also added some bike lanes that connected the transit station to existing bicycle facilities on Villa Street, which is directly north of that station. And as part of this critical process, really the goal was to have community engagement. We had surveys that I mentioned on QR codes. There was also cards that were passed out to local businesses where people could answer that survey. We held community meetings to explain Quick Build and talk about the project. Also, there was door-to-door conversations with the businesses and people along that corridor. And with every project, we did have some less and more positive feedback. One main thing was people were a little bit concerned about the curb extensions, about it made it difficult to make right turns. And I'll get back to that in a little bit, but a lot of people that, particularly those that were walking to the station, thought the improvements were really a big help, and it made them feel much safer walking to that station, as you can see here on this quote. And secondarily, we got a lot of good feedback on Quick Build in general. In general, it was very supportive of it. People liked the idea that they can see and experience something and suggest improvements to that before you're fully committed. Commit, as you can see kind of in this quote at the bottom. And the great thing about Quick Build, it kind of sets you up for more permanent improvements. Right now we have grant funding from the AHSC grant to do more permanent improvements, which are being designed now. And the Quick Build is kind of critical kind of in gathering feedback and adjusting what that permanent design would be, particularly around the curb extensions. It was really great. You know, you can test out those with Quick Build materials, and we were actually able to kind of test out some of the turns of transit vehicles, and we're actually modifying the radius of some of those curb extensions to make sure it works with all appropriate vehicle types. Also, we received some feedback about, providing more educational material about the different features and the safety benefits of, for example, curb extensions compared to bike lanes and so forth. So it's really a great opportunity to kind of try before you commit several $1 million to do more permanent improvements. And as we look to in the future, we thought this is a really good learning lesson about how we can use Quick Build overall in the city. We see a lot of great reasons to try this more. First, allows much more rapid deployment, particularly if you have a safety issue in your city. Maybe you receive a complaint, there was a fatality, or some other thing where you need to address something very quickly. It's a really great way to advance safety projects. Also, it really facilitates community feedback. Some people can attend the meetings, but when you actually put something on the ground, it catches people's attention. They can provide that feedback. It kind of attracts a wider audience who can provide input on that project than you might normally see on other projects. Also, as really robust evaluation, instead of just kind of estimating what the project might do, you can kind of see really what's happening. What are the traffic diversions? What are the changes in volumes of people walking and biking? What are the changes in the safety data? And as we go forward to the city, we kind of see it fitting into this process of, we still, like all cities, start with kind of planning documents, talking to community, what is the vision for particular areas? But now with Quick Build, we could see that being integrated as, once we kind of have a general planning vision, we can kind of test out different things the community is interested in. Shown here in the picture, you can see a Quick Build traffic circle. You can make it very decorative, as shown here. You can kind of test it out, see how that impacts things. And if there's community support, you can advance to more permanent improvements, shown here in kind of a fully built out traffic circle with a planter in the middle. Really excited in the city to try out a lot of different other treatments, kind of expand our toolbox. This is of course, you can do all kinds of different things as shown here, but I think a particular one we're interested in is traffic diverters with Quick Build materials. Had a really good conversation with City of Portland staff, and they always use, almost always use Quick Build materials for traffic diverters, so they can actually see what are the traffic diversions, what is the traffic impacts in parallel streets, and then they can know, should we keep this in? Do we need to remove it? Or does it really work for the community before, committing to more permanent materials? And I just want to thank SCAG for developing this program. Is a really good opportunity for the city to try out quick build materials. We learned a lot of good lessons, and it got us to think through how we might incorporate quick build more along with kind of our other projects that are occurring in the city. And that's all I have there, and happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott. I see a question in the chat from Alina asking, how much time on average do you allocate for obtaining permits? So I will, Scott, if you or someone from the city team has anything to respond for that, that would be great.
Yeah, I think Rich is on the call. He might be able to talk more to this. But I think it depends a lot on how you construct the project. In this case, we use city crews, so it went much faster. We were able to get the project in much quicker. But I would say, in general, from my experience, particularly if you need to do a traffic control plan, or if you're doing, particularly if you're doing a contractor, I would say you'd probably need at least 6 months to get that bid out and get all those features together. But Rich, I know you're on the call. I don't know if you can add to that at all.
Jennifer, do we need to permit Rich ability to unmute? Because I know everyone's muted right now. See, Rich is not one of the presenters at the, or he's not a co-host at the moment.
He should be able, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would say we can move on, but yeah, in general, I would say you probably need, like, I would think at least 6 months, depending on what you're doing, and it kind of depends what permit you're getting, because I know different cities have different traffic control plan permits and different things like that. But especially if you're doing a procurement, I'd say at least 6 months if you're having a contractor do the work.
And we can come back to this question if others have something to add. We have a minute or two before we need to move on to our next presentation, but we do have a question in the chat from Derek and this is for the previous presentation. So maybe Carlos, if you have something to add or something to respond, and then we could also open up to others. The question is, for protected bike lanes, do jurisdictions need to address whether they are creating barriers to the curb for accessible transportation services?
Yeah, so in our case, and this is for, I'm trying to see the question here again. For protected bike lanes, that's what they're creating safety barriers for accessible. So we didn't run into this too much. It was mainly at the intersections, and in some intersections, that's where we had curb extensions. So in that case, actually with Pasadena, we worked very closely with the ADA coordinator, and we had to make sure, like in that case, crosswalks were aligned sort of very closely to the direction that the curb ramps would go in, to reduce the amount of movement that people on a wheelchair would have to experience there. But we didn't really deal with it too much on protected bike lanes, accessible. Yeah, we didn't really have to deal with it too much. In terms of parking, if you're mentioning accessible transportation services, there in Glendale, we did allow for a little bit more space or more width for accessible vehicles to allow for space for people to get off. But those spaces were designated. I hope that answered your question.
And Rachel, I can talk to that a little bit too, because I worked on a similar project when I was with the city of Santa Monica. But we did a protected bike lane on Ocean Avenue, but particularly it actually presented an opportunity putting in the protected bike lane with the quick build materials to actually kind of add accessible parking spaces, because we had enough width to have the parking space and put a basically a wide enough width for somebody in this accessibility device to like the standard ADA width, and we basically put it where you have curb ramps. And so we added accessible spaces, each where you have curb ramps with a direct path to that. So kind of there is sometimes opportunities to actually add more accessible spaces when you're doing projects like this, even with quick build.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott. I do see one more question about the kit of parts. I'm going to save that for our general Q&A. And perhaps Andres or Alina, you could be prepared to help answer that. But for now, we're going to move on to a presentation from City of Long Beach, but we'll certainly come back to that question in our general Q&A. So we'll turn it over to you, Ricardo.
Thank you. I'm Ricardo Light. I'm a transportation planner with the City of Long Beach Department of Public Works. I'm also here with our city traffic engineer, Paul Van Dyke, who'll be available to answer any questions. So yeah, Long Beach has been experimenting with quick build for quite some years now. You know, the biggest upside really with quick build is cost. It's a lot less expensive than doing anything in concrete and more permanent materials. It certainly cuts down in terms of design because you're not having to design for civil, right? It's kind of just the two-dimensional design of a lot of the layout of striping. And construction is a lot easier. There's also a lot fewer stormwater conflicts, right? Anytime you kind of modify a curb, you might have to think about the flow line of water, which I think can be often overlooked. So quick build, you tend to avoid a lot of that. It's also it's a lot easier because it's less costly and easier to design. It's easier to build out a lot of these things more quickly, hence quick build. So you can put in a lot more kind of lane miles, a lot more pedestrian improvements. And so I like to call them kind of foothold improvements. You know, as you move toward more permanent solutions and designs. This kind of really allows us to build out our bicycle and pedestrian network a lot more quickly, and then we can come back in a few years and harden a lot of the improvements that we've done. But this really allows us to get things on the ground sooner, which helps people become more accustomed to the new layouts. And start interacting with those sorts of design features sooner. So we can, you know, either get feedback or even just have people become more accustomed to them, right? A lot of this is new for folks in our society, right? In America, I think a lot of these types of bike lane designs and pedestrian type elements are new to a lot of folks. So kind of the sooner we can engage people in that way, I think the sooner they can become accustomed to seeing these sorts of designs. But they are temporary, which means that they're easily modifiable, and we can always adjust our design as we learn lessons around how people interact with them, what works, what doesn't work. And for us, you know, the easiest thing has been that we do have a paving contractor, and they have line items for a lot of these sorts of materials that we use. And so it's very easy for us to just provide a striping plan that includes quick build materials and incorporate that into our established kind of paving schedule, our 5-year plan for paving throughout the city. And so it's just easier for us to kind of piggyback off of existing paving projects rather than kind of create a project that is solely designed around a bike lane or pedestrian improvements. Just a couple considerations. You know, aesthetically, quick build projects don't always look as nice, right? There's a lot of plastic involved oftentimes. We've started moving away from K71 bollards, mostly just from feedback from community members and some of our electeds that, you know, they don't look nice. Once they kind of get run over a few times, they kind of break down. You know, certainly maintenance, right? It's hard to send our crews out repeatedly to maintain things sometimes. And, you know, it just doesn't look nice once things kind of get beat up. So typically replacing sooner with kind of a hardened treatment might be more aesthetically pleasing, but just things to consider aesthetically. Um, and then ultimately, it is an interim design. Paint is an infrastructure. And so, there's a lot of benefits to experimenting and saving money and implementing more quickly. But really the goal is we're experimenting for the sake of coming back when we can to design a more comfortable facility for bikes and pedestrians. So ultimately, the end goal is to move towards something more permanent. So many types of projects. We have, simplest kind of being high visibility crosswalks, just improving awareness of where pedestrians might be. Bulb outs, curb extensions, buffered and protected bike lanes, traffic circles, roundabouts, bus platforms, right? And we often make these using striping, both paint and thermo. One quick note, we like to use paint for markings in the path of a bike, so within the bike lane, just because thermo has that little bit of a height difference, but that's easily detectable by someone who's riding a bike or a scooter. Um, whereas paint is just kind of a smoother ride, especially if it's in an area where you don't have any vehicle traffic. So the paint would last longer, right, if it's not being driven over by vehicles. I've also been using our concrete separator a lot more, which it'll be coming up in a couple slides, and I can talk more about that. And then we also started using kind of rubberized elements. So curb stops, certainly speed cushions. We are waiting to install our first Zikla platforms, but I know LADOT has experimented with some of these, namely on Broadway. And so, yeah, so these would be used for like temporary bus stops. We've been wanting to use them for passenger loading. So I know there's a question about kind of ADA compliance and access in bike lanes. And so we're looking to pilot ours to address those issues. So our parking protected bike lanes, our first iterations of these, we definitely used a lot of rubber curb stops and green bollards. We've slowly started to move away from using the bollards, and most of that is just, again, requests from our electeds and the community that they just want something that looks a little nicer. And so lately we've been trying different things. In some cases, we'll do just striping and then education first. So we'll use signage to kind of show people where they should park and where the bikes should go. And then we try not to, but oftentimes if we need to, we'll escalate that to enforcement. We experiment with different buffer widths. A big consideration for us is street sweeping. So lately we've been wanting to design our bike lane and width and buffer width total to accommodate a street sweeper, so they can get in there and keep the curbside clean. Yeah, so I touched on ADA access. Again, we want to start using those kind of rubber platforms to experiment with those. We have not installed them yet, so I don't have any photos for those yet. And then our curb separated bikeways, these we install where we did not have existing parking. So these would be in corridors where there was no street parking, um, typically higher speeds. And this just creates kind of a more robust separation and a vertical element to just kind of improve the separation and the protection provided by the separated bikeway. we found that, these are kind of comparable to using rubber curb stops and bollards along the same length of corridor. Um, and they do have sort of these drainage gaps. Initially, we had spaced them every 25 feet, and then we increased to 50, just because it was pretty labor intensive to go every 25 feet. As you can see in these photos, they're it just takes a lot of labor to come through and do all the finish work on the curbs. But even with that, it was still somewhat comparable in cost to rubber and bollards. And then we've also started to experiment with some bidirectional separated bikeways. Yeah. So we've done a lot of bulb outs. We're trying to incorporate these more with our regular kind of slurry seal projects, and really do these on local neighborhood streets, just to kind of, especially around schools, to improve kind of the pedestrian experience in neighborhoods and around schools. And we've started to do this as sort of kind of a standard practice, as much as possible where we can. And the best part about these is, and this was shown kind of in the previous presentations as well, it creates a lot of space for public art. And it kind of allows for neighborhoods to really participate and take a little more ownership in the neighborhood. If they want to kind of be a part of the selection for the artists, or maybe have schools do the design, and then have an activity where they can go out and block off the intersection for a day and go out and paint, or however long that takes. So it just kind of allows for more public participation, certainly community building, um, as well as the safety benefits of curb extensions like self-enforcing daylight zones, and those shortened kind of crossings for folks. We recently did our first quick build roundabout, and we created the ring using a 6-inch asphalt curb, and then kind of just used a 14-foot lane width, just to make sure that we could accommodate the majority of cars and vehicles. And this is like a neighborhood intersection of 2 neighborhood local streets that had some like larger delivery trucks come through. We wanted to reroute those and kind of prioritize more of the pedestrian uses. Just out of frame, there's like a couple of churches, there's a school nearby. So this gets a lot of foot traffic and a lot of vehicle traffic. So overall, this roundabout really improved the experience for both modes. It really shortened, as you can see on the left, you can see the original condition with the cat tracking for the circle. So you can kind of see the in progress, and how wide that intersection was before, versus kind of what is there now, with the curb extensions and the circle. So, really greatly reduced the crossing distance for pedestrians, better traffic flow. You have the yield control rather than stop, which was a little awkward at such a large intersection. So this kind of really improved the overall experience for everyone using it. And thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ricardo. We have a couple questions for you or Paul in the chat, so I'll read them out. So the first one is asking, have shade or street trees universally been eliminated from consideration in city quick build projects?
I think the reverse is actually the case. Some of the pilot demonstrations that we had during the initial COVID response leaned very heavily on traffic control devices to define those spaces, more so than artwork or planters. And I'll say that the programs that more directly involved artwork and trees were the ones that persisted. The ones that looked like a construction zone met a more early demise. So while oftentimes within our own equipment resources, we have cones, we have plastic barricades handy. Just thinking in terms of longevity and popularity of these treatments, aesthetics often matter more than the actual effectiveness of the device. So yeah, we are planning on being a lot more intentional in the future about using trees and ornamental elements in addition to the standard traffic controls.
Thanks, Paul. We have another question that any concerns with the rubber curbs being a tripping hazard for parking protected bike lanes?
So we are still using curbs in certain circumstances. I don't know if we can flip back through the slide deck or not, but one of the photos showed our mountable curb treatment in a parking configuration. I think the one prior to this, Ricardo. Yeah, so you'll notice there that we do have that kind of curved concrete curb in that area. That's there to help to enforce the slower turns around the corner. So we do still have curb height vertical elements. However, we are leaving out wheel stops immediately adjacent to the parking spaces, partly to ensure that there's basically a pedestrian aisle next to the parking within that buffer zone where folks can navigate from a parking space to a curb ramp. But also because many of our treatments here that do involve parking are within parking impacted areas, and the cars themselves serve as the vertical elements. And there's really no need to introduce further items into that cross section of the roadway. For one, they make it more challenging to maintain the street, and they present a maintenance liability in themselves. The photo in the middle of this slide was designed in such a way that we could operate our full-size street sweeper along the corridor. So the closest point of that curb is 10 feet or more away from the face of the gutter curb. And that allows our street sweeper to operate in that area. Some of our previous projects, like the one at the bottom of the photo, need to be swept using much smaller dedicated street sweepers, which are more difficult to keep operational, and they're tougher to locate around town. So that is one of our better pictures of that bikeway. You can see it still has debris and ponding in it. So really, we've been moving away from those curbs less because of the tripping hazard. We haven't really seen a substantial number of trip and fall concerns. It's mostly with regards to the maintenance and cleanliness of those facilities.
Thank you, Paul. All right, one last question before we move on. The question is, have any curb bump out extension projects been hardened, made permanent yet? What would be the timeline / consideration be on those?
So within our bicycle master plan, we actually have a requirement that these demonstration materials are intended to be a 12-month element, and beyond that, the Public Works is supposed to be pursuing permanent improvements. That being said, we do have quite a few of these treatments that have been in place for 5 years or more. That requirement is there often, I think most often leveraged in the case of private development in the immediate area, and then we'll ask them to harden those things. But yeah, we have a number of bulb outs that have been reconstructed in concrete down at our First Street A-line station. We have a substantial new bulb out in that area. We have a number of those asphalt dike traffic circles that have been converted into landscaped traffic circles. So yeah, a good number of these have been hardened, generally about a year or two after the pilot was constructed.
Great. Thank you so much, Ricardo and Paul. I'm going to advance us forward a couple slides. Let's get to our next presentation. All right, so I'll turn it over to the Caltrans District 8 team to tell us about kind of the work around quick builds that they've been doing.
All right, everyone can hear me. My name is Quang Phu Trin, with my colleagues Alexa Pak and Reina Beza Orahel from Caltrans District 8. We're happy to join this SCAG Toolbox Tuesday session to share about the quick build guidance for projects on the state highway system that is under development. Our district initiated this effort as locations across disadvantaged communities could benefit from multimodal improvements in future projects, and we saw that the development of a quick build process could make way for transformative projects across the communities connected by the state highway system. Next slide, please. In today's presentation, we will briefly touch on plans, policies, and training, as well as the objectives and challenges in the development of the quick build guidance and its future for the state highway system. I'll pass it over to Reina to go over the next set of slides.
Good afternoon. Okay, let's see if I can advance the slides here. Jennifer, do you mind?
Sure, no problem. I see the slides moving.
All right, there appears to be a bit of a delay when I advance slides. Okay, so thanks, Quang. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Quang mentioned, we felt that quick build guidance was necessary to establish a standardized process for quick build projects, not only on the state highway system sponsored by Caltrans, so internal projects, but also sponsored by our locals. So we kicked off in 2022. And this effort aligns with some of the plans that you see here, the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, also known as the SHSP, which identifies a specific action for our headquarters team to develop quick build guidance. It also aligns with the Active Transportation Program, Quick Build Pilot Program for non-infrastructure and infrastructure projects. They've had several cycles now, as many of us are aware and have experience with. And then lastly, here you see the Complete Streets Action Plan. We're in our second draft of the action plan, and District 8 has a specific action item to develop the quick build guidance. So next slide here. So first, I wanted to cover the Smart Growth America effort. This was a Complete Streets Leadership Academy, and it was primarily led by District 4 in partnership with headquarters staff, as well as District 8 participation. We were able to develop 3 projects on the state highway system through the encroachment permit process, and we worked with the city of Berkeley, San Leandro, and South San Francisco. And in the slide deck, you'll see that I did link the final report at the bottom of the slides. So this was a short effort. Unfortunately, we weren't able to implement the Berkeley project. We did have the conceptual idea of the project, but we were only able to implement the South San Francisco and the San Leandro. So both projects took place about a year ago, and they were in place for about 8 to 10 weeks. Seen here are the South San Francisco and the San Leandro. You can see the Zikla bus loading pad here, which was very successful. It proved to shorten wait times and loading times from, I believe, a little over a minute to 15 seconds. So this was very successful. And some of the lessons learned, just very high level, we found that there's opportunities to improve the Caltrans approval process. Like I said, we did experience some issues with our encroachment permit process. So the lesson learned was to improve the encroachment permit approval process with our staff. So we do have a training planned this fall, late fall, early winter, to streamline the process of approvals for quick build projects. We also found that communication was critical, not just amongst Caltrans staff, like leading the project, but also with our encroachment permit staff. We also found the communication between the agencies and the Caltrans district staff was critical. We were able to get these projects approved in a very short turnaround, given the challenges experienced with the encroachment permit process. And then we found that we needed to leverage available transportation funding resources, the grant types, different types of programs available to be able to fund quick build projects on the state highway system. So some of the objectives of the quick build guidance, we wanted to develop a process for implementation on the state highway system. The intent of this guidance originally was only for district staff to develop projects in-house, and the outcomes from the Smart Growth America project fed into this effort. So we kind of expanded the guidance for quick build implementation. Another objective was to develop materials list. It's very challenging because we do have very limited approved materials. Not so much of the fancy stuff that some of the other cities displayed today, but we do have some approvals with very temporary materials. We're hoping to expand that list. Some other opportunities are for funding. We found, the objective, right, for the quick build guidance was to find funding, and we were able to develop some resources depending on the limit of the cost of the project itself, whether it's an in-house project. And then, as Kwong mentioned, to promote robust and meaningful engagement with our communities. One of the other outcomes was to develop interim strategies so that we can pursue permanent solutions, something that's, a very limited material to something that's more permanent and long-term. And then also, leading to implementation of permanent installations like we mentioned. So an example here is an implementation by others. This is a District 7 example in Ojai, State Route 33. This was a locally sponsored project that went through the encroachment permit process. Also, it was adapted very quickly and approved. It did have to pursue a decision document, a DSDD, to get some of these materials approved. These aren't necessarily on our materials approved list, but there are workarounds, and the encroachment permit process does allow some flexibility, which is one of the elements that we found during the Smart Growth America effort. And then one thing that we'd like to highlight is a robust maintenance plan is necessary. We found that with some of the projects, there is reoccurring maintenance, and in some cases there isn't quite clear direction as to who should be addressing the materials and upgrading materials or replacement of materials. So we think that a robust maintenance plan with your encroachment permit to develop a quick build project is really, really necessary and key. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Alexa Pock.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Raina. So as Raina mentioned, there were a few challenges that we seem to receive a lot of comments on internally with the quick build guidance. We're currently in draft, and so we're responding to comments that received internally from our colleagues in design and safety divisions. One of the most common comments had to do with materials. And as Raina mentioned, Caltrans does have a limited authorized material list. And we also included in the quick build guidance materials that were used by other Department of Transportations and local agencies, as you've seen in some of the previous slides. And actually the California Transportation Transportation Commission ATP active transportation program has a similar materials list to what we showed in the guide. And so there are the materials that are on the Caltrans authorized materials list for permanent construction projects are pretty much striping and pavement materials and channelizers, maybe as far as using materials from the temporary traffic control list that would also include more barrier types. However, as we've seen that these materials aren't always the most aesthetically pleasing or may not get the the interest of the public. So but in order to use new products for projects, they have to go through a review and approval process. This can be a lengthy process. So although Caltrans could start working on getting more commonly used quick build materials on the materials list, some practices that we could do in the meantime would be to really exercise the design flexibility that Caltrans has acknowledged, that there is a need for design flexibility and engineering judgment while we maintain the integrity and safety on the state highway system, especially when it comes to implementing multimodal projects. And as far as on local systems, Caltrans has given the local entities responsibility to, or has delegated the authority for them to exercise engineering judgment when using the applicable standards. Another issue that we received a lot of comments on had to do with maintenance. That's been spoken about quite a bit because of the material durability. Replacement of these materials could be more frequent and could put a stress on Caltrans maintenance crews. The temporary nature of the installations require different maintenance strategy than more permanent projects. And also there may be a need for using more specialized maintenance equipment, like as we mentioned before, the smaller street sweepers to get into the certain width bike lanes, but that's also a permanent project issue. Also resource allocation. We may need additional maintenance efforts that aren't currently accounted for in our maintenance resource planning. And then lastly, as Raina touched on, the need for a maintenance plan for each quick build project. Actually defining a schedule, the allocated funding for the workforce, equipment, and replacement materials and so forth, as well as maintenance agreements. So who would be responsible for the maintenance of these quick build projects? And depending on the situation, Caltrans may not enter in a maintenance agreement. We may just get letters of commitment, especially on conventional highways. So after highlighting those few topics, I'll hand it back over to Kwong. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexa. Looking at the future, we're in communication across our Caltrans SoCal districts and SCAG on potential coordination efforts and partnership opportunities on quick build projects, focusing on the state highway system facilities that connect our communities. Some of you may already be participating in ongoing discussions with SCAG, and perhaps those of you in our District 8 service area, which includes Riverside and San Bernardino counties, may already be in communication with us and exploring such opportunities to improve safety and mobility for the most vulnerable of our road users. Should any of our district's partners have interest, feel free to reach out to us. Next slide, please. And we thank you for your time and SCAG for the opportunity to speak about the development of Quick Build. As the active transportation portfolio manager in District 8, I primarily look for partnership and funding opportunities to plan for future active transportation improvements. I work alongside my colleague, Alexa, who works to implement multimodal elements in existing highway projects using SHOP, or State Highway Operations and Protection Program funds that are already allocated to Caltrans. Alexa and Raina, would you have anything else to add for this presentation?
Sure, I can just jump in here. Like Kwong said, we're always looking for partnership opportunities. If you are interested, if you do have funding available for a quick build project, we'd like to hear from you. Like Kwong said, our contact information is on this page. We'd like to partner and be able to use our quick build guidance to help develop your project. That's all I have. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I have one specific question in the chat for the Caltrans team asking, can you share the list of Caltrans approved temporary materials?
We do have
Yes.
a public facing link that we can share.
If it's easy during today's session, if you're able to drop that in the chat box, that'd be fantastic. If not, we can also get that shared out as a follow-up to today's session.
I'll do that, Rachel.
Great,
Thank
thank you so
you.
much. All right, there's a little bit of conversation as well in the chat about a concrete curb installation machine. So thank you, Ricardo and Paul, for responding to that. We'll come back around to have more discussion on that if we have time. So I'm going to move ahead to our final presentation from myself covering a funding opportunity. And I know many of you in today's session have likely heard about the Sustainable Communities Program or had the opportunity to join the 2 workshops we held earlier this summer. So I have a few high-level slides. I'll go through them fairly quickly just to not duplicate too much information sharing, but happy to answer questions either during today's session or please feel free to follow up. So just to go through a couple of our slides, as you may have seen, there have been several funding opportunities for quick build projects, but today I'll be focusing on an opportunity through SCAG's Sustainable Communities Program. So overall, the Sustainable Communities Program aims to support implementation of Connect SoCal, our regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy. The specific active transportation and safety call for applications primarily helps advance the Connect SoCal 2024 mobility policies under complete streets, transit and multimodal integration and safety. So this call for application has 6.3 million available across 2 project types. So one is quick builds, as has been the focus for today, and then also there's another project category for plans. I will briefly note, if you've been keeping up with the SCP, you will see that the funding availability has changed. It's been decreased, and this just reflects the state budget that was enacted earlier this summer and a resulting reduction in active transportation program funds, or ATP cycle 7 funds, which is one of the key sources for this call for projects. But we're still moving forward and still soliciting applications, as with the funding we do have available, we want to get it out to our communities. So again, the 2 project types, one is community or area-wide plans. The maximum award for this project type is 500,000, and there are some eligibility requirements that trickle down from the ATP. So the key thing is really that there needs to be an overlap or encompassment of a disadvantaged community. So our guidelines and also the ATP Cycle 7 guidelines have a lot more details about these eligibility requirements, and myself and other members of our SCP team are available to help you navigate the eligibility. The other type of project, which again is the focus of today's session, is a quick build project. And these have a maximum award of 900,000, which covers the engagement, design, implementation, and evaluation of quick build projects. And there's a couple requirements just to help really achieve the goals of a quick build. So there must be extensive engagement, as quick builds can really serve as a engagement tool, and also to be in place for at least 6 months before conducting evaluation. So this is a little different than the timeline that Carlos shared, but again, this is being shaped by our funding sources, particularly the ATP. And just in terms of eligibility, quick build projects are not required to be located in a disadvantaged community, but certainly it would be fantastic for these projects to be benefiting disadvantaged communities. So here's a list of our eligible applicants. The SCP guidelines also reflect these eligible applicants, and this is really driven by our funding sources of the ATP. And then another funding source is a federal Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. As I shared, I don't want to spend too much time on the grant opportunity itself. Just want to make sure everyone here is aware of it as a way to take all the information learned from our presenters and hopefully have an implementation opportunity. So we have a SEP webpage that has a link to the online application and a lot of different resources, including the guidelines that really outline the funding criteria, the eligibility criteria, and the types of projects. Also templates for the scope of work and budget that you'll need to include in your application. We also include the actual evaluation criteria so you can get a sense of what would make a competitive application. We have recordings of 2 workshops that we held earlier this summer, and our SEP team is continuing to provide technical assistance through office hours, which you can book through the SEP webpage. So here's a timeline for this call for projects. The call opened on July 8th and it will be closing on September 27th. So we're about 1 month out from the call closing. Project recommendations and awards will be announced in December at the SCAG Regional Council meeting. And then the awards will be finalized in June 2025 in alignment with the state ATP. Finally, project initiation is anticipated to begin in the summer and fall of 2025. So this is a very brief overview of the SCP active transportation and safety opportunity. So we really encourage you to visit the SCP webpage to learn more about the call. And again, we have ongoing office hours where staff can meet with you to talk about your project, answer any questions ranging from eligibility or kind of feedback on if a project may be a good fit, and also any sort of issues you may have with the application or questions about the resources. All righty. So we've got a little over 10 minutes, just broadly open for any questions folks may have. All right, Ryan, go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, thanks, Rachel. Thanks, everybody. Ryan with Caltrans District 7 here in LA. I was intrigued by Caltrans being eligible to apply for this grant opportunity. I wonder if you've heard of any districts that are interested in applying. I mean, this is something we've talked about before, like having to go through the SHOP program, or I guess actually having to show why we can't use SHOP funds,
right,
and instead need grant funds is tricky for us. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on what other districts might be proposing, or like what kind of projects we might be able to use this program to fund instead of going through the lengthier SHOP program.
Sure. So it's kind of, we present it on the screen at a high level that Caltrans is an eligible applicant, but it's really following what's eligible in the ATP, and in the ATP Cycle 7 guidelines, they indicate that Caltrans would need to show that there's agreement or like partnership with the local agency. And then I am not, the details are not familiar at the top of my head, but I think there is something around discussing the relationship to the SHOP program. So happy to have further discussions, but at this point, I have not heard from other districts that they are interested in applying. But there certainly, just in terms of pure eligibility, and I know funding is a challenge for Caltrans projects. So I know with District 8, the city of Banning has reached out because they completed an active transportation plan and looking to potentially partner. So I think there's maybe some initial conversations about partnerships with local jurisdictions, but certainly would need to kind of take a look back at kind of the ATP guidelines specifically for Caltrans and that eligibility.
Okay, yeah, thanks for clarifying.
Sure. All right, thank you, Alexa, for including in the chat a link to the Caltrans temporary traffic control devices, so that's available for everyone on the call today. And then Andres has put in the chat a link to our SCP webpage, so you can check that out for more information. All right, any other questions for any of our presenters, or any questions about our call for projects? Okay, so while folks are thinking about a question, I just want to come back to the question that regarding SCAG's kit of parts. Alina had responded in the chat, but I just also want to verbalize it for or raise that to everyone's attention. So we included a link to the kit of parts in the chat, but the process is essentially you reach out to Jasmine at SCAG, and her email is in the chat as well. And you essentially just let Jasmine know kind of the event that you're planning to hold, the dates, and we can kind of coordinate the availability and transport of the materials there. And overall, the materials are designed for 1-day use. If a multi-day event is desired, the kit would need to be installed and uninstalled each day. But any specific questions, Jasmine and her team would be able to help you with that. All right, I'm just checking the chat one more time. There was another question regarding the concrete curb installation machine, asking if that is owned by the city or if it's rented. And I know Ricardo and Paul, you respond in the chat, but if you don't mind just briefly responding verbally, that'd be much appreciated.
Sure. So the background on those mountable curbs is that the city had been installing the K71 plastic bollards to define most of our bikeways. And like Ricardo mentioned, they appeared dirty or scuffed pretty quickly and did not hold up to crashes well from vehicles that were traveling more than 20 miles an hour, which is where most of them were placed. And so we were looking for a less labor-intensive separator. And when you account for the amount of work that goes into drilling all the holes, filling all the epoxy for those bollards, as well as replacing and maintaining those temporary materials, in terms of cost, based on our on-call contracts and the line items for curb work, we were able to work with All American to adapt their existing curb machine to just pour that concrete on the surface. I think you can see that in some of the photos that we didn't excavate. And so we still consider those mountable curbs to be quick build or temporary because they don't require any excavation or restoration. If we were to remove them, we can simply just scrape them off. And so, yeah, that's something that's done through our annual on-call. And again, with pretty comparable rates to using the pilot materials that most people think of, like rubber curbs or plastic bollards.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. That's a lot more detail than can be conveyed in the chat, so appreciate you sharing that. All right. Well, we do have some time. I'm gonna advance forward to a survey we have, so as folks are able to scan the QR code, and I'm just gonna give folks a minute or two with any questions. But as we're waiting, I do want to thank everyone, especially our presenters, for taking the time to prepare your presentations and present today, and thank all of you for joining us today. We hope that you gain new information and inspiration to advance roadway safety and complete streets in your community. So again, we do have a survey here. You can scan the QR code, or Andres has included in the chat a link to a Survey Monkey. I see a question regarding, is there a way to obtain a copy of this presentation recording and slides? Yes, it will be posted on our Toolbox Tuesday webpage and also emailed out to everyone who registered. And then let's go back to Paul and Ricardo's a question if you need to use any anchoring / R bar for the concrete curb.
Yes. So for the demonstration version of those curbs, we do include rebar pins at regular intervals. There are a couple variants that we're also using as part of grind and overlay projects where they do have a 2-inch depth to them and do not involve anchoring, but yeah, we do make sure that they're pinned in place.
Great, thank you.
For really, if you wanted more information on it, we actually adapted that detail from the city of Portland, Oregon. And so happy to make some connections there if necessary, but they generally have a pretty good public presence and are pretty approachable for those types of things. So they have 3 variants, one for casting on the surface of existing concrete, one for the surface of existing asphalt, and one, like I just mentioned, as part of a 2-inch granite overlay. So yeah, multiple methods to install those, but we've been really impressed with them in their resiliency and effectiveness. So
Great, thanks, Paul. I'll just briefly note, thank you to Amanda for including in the chat a link to where the slide and recording would be posted. And then Alexa, you have a question or comment?
Yes, I had a question. It was regarding the Pasadena project. I think it was the Allen Street improvements. I was curious, in the photograph, it kind of looks like there's a grade differential between the bike lane and the traffic lane pavement. And I was curious to like what stage of the project that was in, like how that occurred.
Yeah, happy to answer. I think that might just be the picture. There's no grade differential. That was just a
Okay.
standard. So that was just basically paint standard kind of your class 2 bike lane, your standard bike lane. I think it was just a visual thing. But that basically there was extra space on the road, so we were able to kind of create a short connection to an existing facility. But yeah.
Okay, that was the section where it was like painted like kind of reddish.
Oh, for
Reddish.
the curb extension, are you talking about? I don't know, Rachel, if you're able to go back to that picture. I couldn't tell what slide it is, but about in the middle of the presentation, or I can control it, I think.
Maybe just start clicking back.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's 2 components. So the green was the bike lane, and then we did curb extensions on the corner, and there is a grade differential because we're not building out the curb, and hopefully I can get this picture.
Sorry to ask about something so far
No,
back.
no, happy to. Almost there. The picture will help clarify. One more, I think. No, one more. Yeah, so it's basically kind of a 2 shape. So basically you still have the existing curb ramp. I'm assuming you're talking about this kind of center red picture.
No, actually one, I think it was one back.
Okay.
There it is. See, it seems like the bike lane is lower. Oh, is that because there's the curb stops? That's what it is, maybe.
Yeah, this is a curb stop, and this is actually not a bike lane. If you could kind of see the whole picture, it's just basically a very long curb extension, is what it was. And you can see there was existing red curb, and the main purpose of that was just to have really good visibility on that corner, so vehicles aren't tied around the corner and they can see people crossing. But yeah, that's kind of the background on that.
Okay, great. Now I get it. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we're almost right at 3. So again, thank you to all of our presenters, and also a big thank you to Jennifer, our AV staff, for supporting today's meeting. We'll be following up with the recording and presentation materials, but thank you all for your attendance and engagement today. We really appreciate it and hope today's session was interesting and informative for you all.
Thanks, everyone.